several years ago, gathered in the Rotunda in St. Paul to celebrate marriage equality. I was gathered with longtime friends and colleagues, pastors and rabbis and parents and children from many traditions and perspectives, and it was not a place I had imagined that I would have been years before. It took me a while to shift from my thinking to more closely align with the feelings of my heart as I grew up, when it came to the support and affirmation of LGBTQ plus people. It took for me a deep reinterpretation of biblical texts and traditional dogma, which for me was critical and was surprisingly liberating, to know that I could believe all people were sacred, no question, without exception, and not reject my religion. That a faithful reading of scripture and tradition and teachings could lead one to deeply held religious beliefs of inclusion and affirmation and love for all people. It took conversations with friends and loved ones, long conversations with very gracious professors and pastors. It took me some time, and I had the luxury of that time. And thank God for gracious companions along the way, willing to stick it out with me because they knew these conversations weren't about me, but about creating a world where other people would have the time and the right and the possibility to live and dream and be, to have what Tim Flugos writes in his poem, Magic Moments in Ordinary Time. He writes, "Which are the magic moments in ordinary time? All of them for those who can see. That is what redemption means, I decide at the meeting. I decide that the magic isn't something that I make, but something that shines through the things that I make and do and say, the way a scrap of fabric shines to catch the eye in a costume. When I am fearless and thorough enough to give it room, all the room there is in ordinary time, then that space embraces all people and events and hopes, and still leaves room for everyone and everything and every other place, the undescribed and the indescribable, more various than voice can tell or mind can conceive, and for the sky's vast depths from which they're all a speck of light." This chalice is for the sacred light in us all, and for creating space within ordinary time and everyday lives for the growing light of inclusion, of affirmation, of justice that still can and must be.
Good morning. Before retiring in April of this year, my life's work has been as a clinical social worker in various settings. I worked in an outpatient mental health center, shelters for battered women, day treatment level 4 elementary schools, foster homes, and outreach centers for at-risk teens. I've worked with adults, teens, and children. In my work as a psychotherapist, I saw much heartache from LGBTQ clients who felt that they were not accepted by their friends and their families. There was the young teen who identified as a male who dared not to talk to peers about this and who felt terribly alone at school. The lesbian middle-aged woman who was ostracized from her family because of her sexuality once she came out to them. The father of an infant who felt he couldn't speak freely with his wife about his female feelings and feared he had no choice but to end his marriage. The transgendered male whose family would not call him by his new legal name once he had his birth certificate changed when he went to court. Their pain went very deep and followed them for years to come. They were not sure how to make their way in the world when the people who knew them most intimately or from the beginnings of their existence felt that their very essence wasn't good enough. GLBTQ clients that I counseled often felt that they had to be less than honest with their families about who they were, who they loved, and how they lived. They lived life in the shadows. As a psychotherapist, I had to follow certain principles in working with clients. One of these principles was the idea of unconditional acceptance. This is the idea that a client will be viewed by a therapist as a valued person with dignity and worth, regardless of anybody else's beliefs. Without this principle, clients would never be forthcoming about their fears or their insecurities, and therefore therapy wouldn't be successful. A therapist would never know what somebody thought and therefore would be unable to help them. When families do not treat their loved ones with the same message of unconditional acceptance, people go into hiding. They feel that their sexuality is judged with contempt. The message of shame is given loud and clear, and fear takes over a person's life. A person's self-esteem is harmed, and the essence of that person is damaged. They can no longer speak freely or share their ideas openly. They feel devalued. This kind of pain has been a major experience by LGBTQ persons. Getting the message that there is something so basically wrong with you that you have to change into somebody that you're not to be acceptable to those around you is a demoralizing life sentence. LGBTQ persons have been subjected to this under the guise of help by being forced into conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is also known as reparation therapy, and it's aimed at changing an individual's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression by caregivers or other adults in positions of authority, who see that this person's alignment of being gay has to be fixed. It's grounded in the belief that being LGBTQ is abnormal. It employs dangerous and discredited practices rejected by every mainstream medical and mental health organization for years. These conversion therapists use painful physical stimuli and shaming techniques to make their victims associate these stimuli and thoughts with their gay and lesbian identities. This is done in the hopes of making them reject their sexual orientation and to take on a heterosexual orientation, regardless of what they want. Upwards of 698,000 LGBTQ adults have received conversion therapy at some point in their lives, including about 350,000 who received it as adolescents. Only 18 states, the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, have outlawed this as of this year. The American Psychological Association has clarified that the risks of this therapy are many, including increased depression, anxiety, self-destructive behaviors, and suicidal thoughts, which leads to all sorts of additional problems such as drug abuse, dropping out of school, and homelessness. Thousands of youth, upwards of 30,000 per year in the US, are still being subjected to this so-called treatment as conversion therapists align with the societal prejudices against homosexuality, which reinforce self-hatred. Parents pushing children to be subjected to these techniques instill feelings of rejection, disappointment, and non-acceptance, which in turn begins a cascading effect of self-doubt and shame and self-hatred. These youth start to live life in the shadows with fear that their feelings towards themselves and others may be found out. As recently as 2016, this so-called therapy was promoted publicly in the presidential race by Vice President-elect Mike Pence. LGBTQ persons are simply trying to live their life out loud like every other human being is doing. They want to share who they are with others without being judged, demeaned, or devalued. Having to put up walls within oneself is exhausting, it's humiliating, it's restricting. It takes so much joy out of one's life when you cannot be who you are. Having a parent or family member treat a child or adult with anything less than unconditional sacred acceptance and love leaves lifelong scars. being told by a family member or friend that your way of being is not the acceptable way to live assumes that somebody else holds the key. Somebody else holds the key to your being, approved by the greater world in their hands. It assumes that you cannot figure out your own life's journey to seeking love and living a fulfilling adulthood. People have basic wants: to be able to use their own names in referring to themselves, to speak freely about their thoughts, their feelings, their opinions without fear, to dress the way they feel most comfortable in, to spend time with the people they enjoy and love, to marry the person they fall in love with, and to think about themselves as decent and loving individuals. This is what LGBTQ people want too. They need no repairs, no fixes to live a fulfilled and loving life. They need no stamp of approval from another human being. None of us have the right to be judge and jury as to how another person expresses their sexual love in the world. We can only make decisions for how we live our own life. Only our one single life, no one else's. We have many options to choose from, many paths to consider, but the choice to be made is ours alone from birth to death. Each of us is looking for affirmation while we make our life's journey, a journey which is both wonderful and difficult. Most importantly, we all have the right to love others out loud, each and every one of us, without exception. Love others out loud.
But you didn't even notice. It ain't raining anymore. It's hard to breathe when all you know is the struggle of staying above the rising waterline. Well, the sky has finally opened. The rain and wind stop blowing, but you're stuck out in that same old storm again. You hold tight to your umbrella. Well, darling, I'm just trying to tell you that there's always been a rainbow hanging over your head. If you could see what I see, you'd be blinded by the colors, yellow, red, and orange, and green, and at least a million others. So tie up the boat, take off your coat, and take a look around. 'Cause the sky has finally opened, the rain and wind stop blowing, but you're stuck out in that same old storm again. Let's get go of your umbrella, 'cause darling, I'm just trying to tell ya that there's always been a rainbow hanging over your head. Yeah, there's always been a rainbow hanging over your head. It'll all be all right.
Good morning. I'm really excited to be here. I'm also a little intimidated, not because of the spiritual space and sacred space that this is, but because each of one of you is very talented and has such amazing voices. I just graduated from St. Olaf College, and so we're known for our choir, so I tried to take voice lessons, didn't work. So I'm just in the corner like, very timidly. But I'm really excited to be here. My name's Junior Avalos. I use any pronouns. Pronouns are what we use when we're referring to somebody in a third person. I was invited here to speak about conversion therapy. So I might get teary, I don't know. I'm just giving you a fair warning. But the reason why I'm here is because I'm also gonna go on tangent, so I'll probably start my timer. I don't wanna keep you all day. So I work for Out From Minnesota. Out From Minnesota is the state's largest LGBTQ org here. We were one of the groups that was fighting for marriage equality. We passed the Safe in Schools Act. We currently worked with the state to have gender-neutral markers on IDs, and we're doing this work. We've been doing this work since 1987. And I'm here because I am a survivor of conversion therapy. I went through conversion therapy at a very young age, and so I'm here to talk about that. The reason why we're starting to hear more about it, has anybody here seen Boy Erased? Show of hands, a few people. So Boy Erased is a movie based off the book by Garrett Conley. It's the first piece of literature in mainstream pop culture that talks about the seriousness of conversion therapy. Historically, through pop culture, we've seen conversion therapy as something satire, something that we can laugh about, because it protects us. If anybody ever saw But I'm a Cheerleader in the 90s, it's a movie about a cheerleader who has lesbian thoughts and she gets sent to conversion therapy, and it has RuPaul in it, and it's like funny. You've probably seen skits by SNL, the one with, who's the one that plays Batman? But he's in it, and there's South Park also has an episode about it. Conversion therapy is something really serious. As we heard earlier, it's something that affects LGBTQ people. It affects how they live, how they present themselves to the world, and it's something hard. When I was 10 years old, I started to have feelings, started to have thoughts of the other people in my congregation. I was a Jehovah's Witness, so I was surprised when I came outside and I saw them. I was like, where am I actually going? Am I going there? So I was scared. I was like, oh, I thought I was going somewhere else. Then I took the corner and I was like, oh, okay, I'm safe. And I also know that by now they still haven't even gotten to their second hymn, so we're doing good time here. But I was 10 years old, and I started having these thoughts. I started to express my feelings, as one naturally does. I wasn't harming anybody, but I was starting to get that messaging of the path that I'm supposed to take, and I was the deviant. And so, sorry, I'm just trying to wrestle my thoughts. But I first started through what they call shepherding. And that's when the elders in my congregation would sit me down, and they would figure out like what's wrong with me. They would tell me like, oh, this isn't right. You know, they tell me the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. They tell me how, we wouldn't inherit the earth, that it was a grave sin. And so it started off with, from the age of 10 to 15, me going through every week, every Tuesday and Sunday, after church, having to hear, that I'm doing something wrong. I was being told that who I wasn't perfect, which was contradicting to what I was learning. I was told that God created each and one of us in a specific way. We were born perfect, and that love can manifest in many different ways. And I was like, well, that's what you were telling me, and now you're telling me something different. You're telling me that who I am is not who I actually am, and you're telling me that God made a mistake. So I felt gross about myself. I felt like I wasn't human. And so I spent those 5 years in the closet. I spent them hiding my feelings. I got baptized because I thought that would get me closer to God, that would make me change. And it didn't. I was having relationships with guys, having boyfriends and at school, and I would come home and I'd say, like, yeah, I have a girlfriend. You know, she's really pretty. She's 6'5", and she has a lot of like facial hair, but that's okay. I also played football, so that's why he was like really tall, and But so then at 16, I got outed again, and as a Jehovah's Witness, we were told that the way to repent is by cutting ties off with your congregation, with your family, and so I knew how this looked like. My mom, she had an affair. And so when she told the congregation, we couldn't talk to her, even as her son. Like I couldn't speak to her. I couldn't. The only thing I could say is like, we're out of food. The bills need to be paid. And that was it. I couldn't tell her about my day. I couldn't tell her about what was going through, because we thought that by cutting ties, we'd grow that need to come back to the community. And so when I was outed at 16. As somebody that was baptized, I was facing that same, path of like, if I don't change, that I'm getting cut off by my community. And that was the only community that I knew. I don't want to bash the Jehovah's Witnesses, but they're kind of cultish, not gonna lie. There's good people there, but not. So at 16, my mom only wants the best for me. She doesn't know what's going on. She wants to make sure that I'm living a great life. And so, historically we've been taught that homosexuals, gay people will get AIDS, will get HIV, and they'll die. They won't live happy lives and stuff like that. So those are all the narratives that I'm receiving as a 16-year-old. And one day, my father threw me against a wall because he thought that I was talking to a guy on the internet, which I wasn't. I was working on homework. And I got into a physical altercation with him. That night, the police had to be called, and I got arrested at 16 for assault. And when the cop was asking for my statement, I told him, my parents thought, while I was doing homework, my parents thought that I was talking to a guy. They just found out that I'm gay, and they're not really taking it well. And so the police officer's like, there's camps that can fix you, right? This is in Houston, Texas, not in Minnesota. So this is how that police officer reacted. And so this is an authority figure that I'm told to respect. All these authority figures, the elders in my congregation, my parents, are telling me that there's something wrong with me. Everywhere that I go, someone's telling me that there's something wrong with me. And so I was tired. The elders in my congregation told me, you're going to get disfellowed. If you don't change, you won't be able to talk to your family. You won't be able to talk to your congregation. Like, it's going to be over until you fix yourself. And so at 16, I got on the internet. This was in 2013. And I found a camp in Texas that promised to fix me. It was a military-style boot camp, and they promised that they could fix me from gay to straight. I applied. It cost $600. I got a job at a fast food restaurant, even though I wasn't supposed to. In Texas, I was still 15, so it's illegal to get a job at that age. But I knew the owner, and so I got a job. Raised those $600, and I paid for it. And I took a Greyhound all by myself from Houston, Texas to Austin. Got picked up in a white van and was taken somewhere in northern Texas. To this day, I don't know where. And I attended this conversion therapy camp that promised to change me. I was there for 2 weeks. During that time, it was a process of breaking people down in order to change us. So we'd first start off by, very happy, very like communal. It's like brother. It was a bunch of guys. I think there was 2 girls, if I remember correctly. But we were told that we would, we're here in this journey together. And then to ease us up, get us to lower our guard, and that. And then after the second day, it's when it kind of got intense. It first started off with verbal abuse, screaming, throwing derogatory terms at us. They'd make us do physical labor. So for example, we'd wake up at 6 a.m. and we'd carry logs. And while we're carrying these logs, we were being screamed all these profanities. And after that, it started getting more physical. If my wrist was a little too loose, if I did this, we'd get beat up. We'd get thrown on the floor and actually get beat up. Some sessions we'd have to sit in a space like this. We'd have to sit in the front and talk about our sexual desires, and we would be shamed and sometimes hit at the same time. This is the one that everyone gets shocked about. There was this one time where it was dinner time. We come into the mess hall and we're ready to eat. The food smells great. We sit down, we take a bite, and it's rotten food. And the analogy that they used was, this is how it feels to live a homosexual lifestyle, eating rotting. It was supposed to be a teaching moment where it's, you're not going to find fulfillment in this. This is something that you shouldn't be putting inside of your body. Having these feelings is something that's going to hurt you on the inside. And so this was 2 weeks of solidified attacks on us, where it's just like, you are worthless, you are nothing. I left those 2 weeks with suicidal ideation. I already had depression and anxiety, so that was just like through the roof at that point. And I left there untrusting the world. I had two thoughts. I had either the thought of hiding who I was and waiting until my mom died so I could live who I was, or I could just end my own life. Those are my two thoughts. It's either ending my own or waiting until my mom dies so I can live who I actually am. And those aren't thoughts that a 16-year-old should have ever. Those are thoughts that anybody should have at all. And so I left that camp. Coincidentally, I had also applied to be at a dance intensive in Philadelphia a few weeks after. So I took the Greyhound from Austin to Philadelphia all by myself. And when I got there, I always say it's some miracle or some joke by the universe. My dorm was in the middle of Gayborhood, which is the gay neighborhood in Philly. It was just a week post-Pride. And, I was like, for the past 6 years of my life where I'm starting to come into terms with my sexuality, I start to see people out and about, men holding hands, women holding hands. I see drag queens for the first time. I'm like, I don't know what that is. And so, I was taken ajar because I'm like seeing for the first time that people like me are living authentically. They're smiling, they're celebrating. I don't know why, because it's like, you're gonna go to hell. I make a lot of jokes, by the way, just because that's how I cope, if you haven't noticed by now. I'm at 12 minutes. I should hurry up. Yeah. But so this is the first time that I'm seeing queer people and trans people out and proud of who they are. And I'm enjoying these 3 weeks by myself. I'm seeing like how beautifully people are living. And then I have to go back home. I have to go back to Texas. My mom still doesn't know that I went through conversion therapy. I did it because I wanted to please her, but I came back lying to myself again. I was like, oh yeah, I'm straight, which wasn't the case. But I hit that I went through conversion therapy, and I still had 1 year left of high school. I applied to over 30 schools across the country because I just wanted to get out. I was like, I want to relive that experience that I had when I was in Philly, when I was living by myself, when I was seeing other queer people. And I went through all the colleges. I was like, I want to be a dance major. I also want to do poli-sci, and so I ended up in Minnesota because I knew of the history that Minnesota has as being a progressive fighter for LGBTQ rights since 1993, including gender nonconforming people in our Equal Rights Acts. And so that's why I came here. I came to Minnesota because I saw, and I'm seeing it right now, just like the way that community is building up, the way that community comes together, and how, I got to create a chosen family here. I came here, the first thing that I asked when I came to visit St. Olaf College, I visited all the schools in Minnesota, Macalester, St. John St. Ben's, all of them. But I stick to St. Olaf because there was two groups that I talked to. It was a campus ministry and the GSA there, the Gender and Sexuality Alliance. And I asked both of them, how am I going to be treated if I come out as gay here? And I was received with open arms. I was told that I could live happily, that I would be fine, that I'd be protected, and that everything would be okay. So I stick to Minnesota, even though the winters suck here. This was the first year I've had to drive in the snow, let me tell you. I'm regretting every decision I ever made now. Conversion therapy was easy compared to driving in the snow. That's a lie. But yeah, so I stick to Minnesota. And then it wasn't until 2016, as mentioned, that when Mike Pence started coming into as president-elect, that I was like, this is messed up. I went through this, and I went through it for a bunch of my life, and the reality is that conversion therapy is not just a single thing that happens. It's something that all LGBTQ people face because it's emerged into our culture. We're constantly telling LGBTQ people that they don't belong, that they're an other, and that's not true. And so after graduating last year, I was like, I want to continue. I did a lot of political work. I worked on Angie Craig's campaign. I worked for Senator Franken for a while. I did stuff with the DFL, with Governor Mark Dayton. And so I was already trying to figure out how can I continue to do this work? I want to continue to help people. So I found Outfront. Outfront had been working to ban conversion therapy for the past couple of years, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it just because we had an unfriendly LGBTQ majority in the House and the Senate. And when I came on board, my job was to flip some of those House seats, and I did it. And we got 12 of the 15 people that we were focusing on elected. Representative Hunter Cantrell was one of them. He's the only openly gay state representative here in the state of Minnesota as of right now. And, I've been working with him the past year to push this bill to ban conversion therapy in the state, just because it's a reality that's still happening here. A few months ago, I was in St. Cloud. I was talking about my experience, kind of doing the same here, and a mom approached me and she told me, hey, my son just told me that his friend is going away for 2 weeks somewhere in northern Minnesota because she just came out as lesbian. And she asked me, what can we do? And I said, we can't stop them. We can't stop them because legally they're protected to do stuff like this in the state of Minnesota. Our bill is kind of seen, the bill that we were trying to pass, it seems like super out there. It's gonna stop religious freedom, which is not true. Our bill says that anybody under the age of 18 and vulnerable adults can receive conversion therapy because we know it doesn't work. We know that it hurts people. We know that it's something that's unhealthy for our communities, and it continues this idea that LGBTQ people are sick, which is not true. The second part of the bill would have stopped charging people for conversion therapy. So for example, like me, I didn't go through a church. I went through a program called Journey to Brotherhood or something like that, and I paid $600 for it. So if a bill like that was placed in Texas, then I couldn't have received conversion therapy because I was paying for it. And so that's where our bill would have focused and would have protected so that young girl who probably went through conversion therapy here in the state of Minnesota could have been protected, and I could have told that mom, you can report them. You can report them to police, you can report them to the medical boards here in the state of Minnesota, and we could do something. But unfortunately, we don't have those protections. And And unfortunately, the reality is that it didn't pass this year, the bill, because of an unfriendly Senate majority. Even though one of the state senators, their own kid, came out as a survivor of conversion therapy. I think it was Senator Gazelka. Their kid talked, they didn't come out during marriage equality. They didn't talk about any other LGBTQ issue, but this is the one that they came out with because their dad put them through conversion therapy. And yet it still didn't pass. I don't know how I'm supposed to wrap this up. Other than, it's conversion therapy is an issue and I went through it. So one of the things that I'm working on this year is this fall is passing a municipal ban in St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Duluth. And hopefully that inspires for state legislation. And we can do this work through people like you. I think one of the big things that I want to put out there also is that if you or anybody you know has gone through conversion therapy, there's a group of us, of survivors up in the Twin Cities. We're willing to travel wherever to create safe space for people that have gone through it. There's so many of us that are just coming out of the woodwork because we're tired of seeing of what's going on. And yeah, that's who I am. Usually I end this by saying like, okay, not to lively the mood, I'm gonna do a tap dance, but I don't think we want that, and I didn't bring my tap shoes. But I wanna commend each and one of you for being in a space like this. And I think I'll close it out so I'm a dancer, not right now because my joints and my knees are like not cooperating with me at this point in life, and I'm only 23. But I'd like to invite everybody to rub your hands together if you're able to. And then ask both of your neighbors on your left and your right if they're okay with you holding hands. And then put your hands out, grab hands, and then we're gonna take a deep breath in. And we're gonna release it. And we're gonna take one back in. And we're gonna release it. We're going to take a moment to just feel each other and feel that warmth going through each one of our hands. So I just want to thank you for having me, for sharing this space with me. I honestly believe that energy is a real thing. We know that it's a real thing, kinetic energy, sound vibrations, but also the warmth that we give as energy, and we share that in this space. We share that every time we go out. We share that every time we show love. Every time the choir sings, I can feel that energy. You Will Be Found was actually a song that the St. Olaf Choir sang in our student commons when President Trump got elected. I was in a deep state of depression just because as a survivor of conversion therapy, as a survivor of sexual assault, of so many things, being brown, I was in a slump, and that energy, that sharing of energy is what keeps me going forward. So continue to share your energy, continue to move forward, and being in community. Thank you.
I invite you, as you're comfortable, to again join a hand next to you or place your hand over your heart and breathe deep the breath of life. There is an ancient religious spiritual teaching in universalism and in most traditions. It's Imago Dei. You are made in the image of the holy. There is nothing wrong with you. You are sacred. You are beloved as you are. May that be reflected in our laws as much as in our spirituality. Amen.